Chapter 1. Introduction to Corporate Finance. Question 6. Justify the following statements. 4 marks each. 1. The firm has multiple choices of sources of financing. Answer. 1. Finance is the lifeblood of business. Success of any business organization largely depends upon how efficiently it generates and uses the finance for the business. 2. There are multiple choices of sources of financing available to a firm, and the same are as under. A. Equity share capital. Every company must issue equity shares. It is the basic source of financing activities of business. The persons who purchase equity shares are known as equity shareholders, and they bear the ultimate risk associated with ownership. They receive dividend at a fluctuating rate depending upon the profit earned. B. Preference share capital. Preference shares carry preferential right in respect of payment of dividend and return of capital over equity shares when the company is liquidated. These shares carry dividend at a fixed rate. C. Retained earnings. Profit, which is kept aside and not distributed as dividend to the shareholders, is retained earnings. It is an internal source of financing. It is nothing but plowing back of profits. D. Borrowed capital. Any money raised by a company carrying interest as return is termed as borrowed capital. It comprises of the following. A. Debentures. A debenture is an acknowledgement of debt raised by company. Company has to pay interest on debentures at an agreed rate. B. Term loan. Term loans, that is, loans for long-term period, are provided by banks and other financial institutions. They carry fixed rate of interest. 3. Thus, the firm has multiple choices of sources of financing. 2. There are various factors affecting the requirement of fixed capital. Answer. 1. The capital, which is used for buying fixed assets, to be used for a longer period of time in the business, is called fixed capital. 2. The requirement of fixed capital depends upon various factors, such as A. Nature of business. Manufacturing companies, transport companies, and public utilities require more fixed capital. B. Size of business. A large-sized business entity always needs more fixed capital, as its production processes are based on automatic machines and equipments. C. International conditions. Companies carrying on international business need large amount of fixed capital to expand their production. D. Consumer preference. If the goods and services produced by a company are in great demand, it needs more funds to invest in fixed assets. E. Scope of business. Manufacturing of complex products, like vehicles, need more fixed capital. F. Extent of lease or rent. If a company decides to acquire fixed assets on a lease basis, it will require less fixed capital. However, if the company makes full payments initially, it will require more fixed capital. G. Competitive factor. If any of the competitors have upgraded the technology, the other companies in the same line of activity need more fixed capital to remain in competition. H. Acquisition of old assets. If a company acquires old plants and machineries at lower prices, it would need less fixed capital. I. Arrangement of subcontract. If there is a possibility of outsourcing some process of production to others, then the requirement of fixed capital would be reduced. 3. Thus, there are various factors affecting requirement of fixed capital. 3. Fixed capital stays in the business almost permanently. Answer. 1. The capital, which is used for buying fixed assets, to be used for a longer period of time, in the business, is called fixed capital. 2. Fixed capital is the compulsory initial investment made by the entrepreneur to start up the activities of his business. Therefore, it is a mandatory one-time investment made at the introductory phase of a business. 3. In simple words, fixed capital refers to the capital invested for acquiring fixed assets, such as land and building, plant and machinery, furniture, etc., which are used in the business for a longer period of time. 4. In case of a new company, a list of different fixed assets needed by the company will be prepared. The total cost of these assets is estimated, which would be the requirement of fixed capital of the new company. 5. Existing companies also require fixed capital for expansion and modernization of business by purchasing new machineries which remain in the business for a long period of time. 6. Manufacturing companies, transport companies, and public utilities require more fixed capital to initiate their business. 7. Similarly, a large-sized business entity always needs more fixed capital, as its production processes are based on automatic machines and equipments. 8. Thus, fixed capital implies the capital invested for purchasing fixed assets to be used in the business for a longer period of time, and hence, it stays in the business almost permanently. 4. Capital structure is composed of owned funds and borrowed funds. Answer. 1. The capital structure of a company is referred to the way in which the company finances itself through owned capital and borrowed capital. 2. To decide capital structure means to decide the ratio of different sources of capital, that is, owned capital and borrowed capital. 3. The owned capital of a company consists of equity share capital, preference share capital, and retained earnings, whereas borrowed capital consists of debentures, bank loans, bonds, public deposits, etc. 4. Equity shares is the basic source of financing, and every company must issue equity shares. Equity shareholders bear the ultimate risk associated with ownership. 5. Preference shares carry preferential right in respect of payment of dividend and return of capital over equity shares when the company is liquidated. It is not compulsory for a company to issue preference shares. 6. Profit which is kept aside and not distributed as dividend to the shareholders is retained earnings. It is an internal source of financing. 7. A well-established company with stable earnings can opt for borrowed capital in the form of debentures, bank loans, etc. 8. If the funds are required for a longer period of time, company prefers owned funds, and if the funds are required for short period of time, it prefers borrowed funds. 9. If the prevailing rate of interest in the market is higher, company prefers to issue owned capital, and if the rate of interest is lower, it prefers to issue borrowed capital. 10. Similarly, during boom period, company issues equity shares, and during recession period, company issues debt securities. 11. Thus, capital structure is composed of owned funds and borrowed funds. 5. There are various factors affecting the requirement of working capital. Answer. 1. Working capital is that part of the total capital which is required for running the day-to-day operations of the business. 2. The requirement of working capital depends upon various factors, such as a. Nature of business. Companies engaged in production of essential goods of daily consumption and public utilities require less working capital. B. External factors. If there is easy availability of finance from banks and financial institutions, the need for working capital is reduced. C. terms of purchases and sales. If company makes purchases on credit and sells on a cash basis, it will require less amount of working capital. D. Production cycle. If the period of production cycle is long, more working capital will be needed, and if production cycle is short, less working capital will be needed. E. Volume of sales. If the volume of sales increases, there is an increase in the requirement of working capital, and vice versa. F. Credit control. If the credit policy is strong, the company will require less working capital. G. Business cycle. During the boom period, company requires more working capital, and during recession, the need of working capital declines. H. Size of business. More working capital is required in case of big organizations, while less is needed in case of small organizations. I. Growth and expansion. The organization, which has sufficient possibilities of growth, require more amount of working capital. 3. Thus, there are various factors affecting the requirement of working capital.